Hi, I'm Alucci. I'm a technical program manager on the Intune team, and I specifically work for Tunnel and Tunnel for MAM. We're going to dive into Tunnel for MAM in this presentation, so let's get right in. The world today has really taken a shift. It's had an interesting impact on the way that we work. When we take a look at the numbers, a few that come to mind is the 87%. 87% of employees are offered flexible work options to work remotely at least 3 out of the days per week. Because of COVID, the number of remote workers have skyrocketed. Employees are now looking for flexible work from home policies, and this has affected how we look at device management overall. As a result, these changes have informed our views about the major changes in endpoint management. Honing in on our customers' changes and the changes of the workplace has led us to roll out a suite of advanced management solutions, kind of focusing in on three main areas. First one being simplified management and delivering a richer employee experience. Second one being we want to make sure we're protecting your data from users' data to companies' data. And then lastly, we want to reduce the total cost of ownership. So because of this, we've rolled out, like I said before, a suite of Microsoft products, all going from remote help, advanced endpoint analytics, endpoint privilege manager, just to name a few. All of these with the same focus on our same main areas. With remote help, true to its name, it's a remote assistance solution that enables help desks to have a better support for their employees. Next, we have endpoint privilege management solution, which allows admins to manage and automate their workers' permissions to use admin privileges for a specific task. But I really want us to focus on a key area, and that's Tunnel for MAM, which we're going to dive into in a minute. But before I dive into that, I think it's really important that we level set what Tunnel is and why we built it. So taking a step back, a couple years ago, we got a lot of requests from our customers to build a first-class VPN solution for mobile devices. A lot of our customers that were moving from other MDM solutions to Intune wanted a tunnel-based solution that allowed mobile teams to spin up their own VPN environments without relying on the global VPN team. So this is a gateway component that allows you to install on-prem. So with that being said, we wanted to continue to listen to our customers to allow mobile teams the opportunity to spin up their own VPN environments without relying on global VPN teams. With that in mind, we wanted to provide them with on-prem connectivity or make it easier for them to provide on-prem connectivity while keeping it all in the same MDM team's control. And that's when Tunnel was born, which is pretty much a VPN gateway solution that runs in a container that's on Linux. And it allows access to your on-prem resources from your mobile devices. And it's been well received on the market. And after that, we've actually made a few improvements to our current tunnel system. We've actually got a better together story with Defender where we combine Tunnel's connectivity functionality with Defender's anti-phishing and security functionality. We've also improved the Tunnel gateway with pre-check script. We've also added health metrics. We really just built on top of our Tunnel infrastructure to make sure that we're providing our customers with a great solution. Continuing from listening to our customers, we went back to them and they explained they wanted to launch their BYOD programs. This specifically in the economic solution with purchasing corporate devices doesn't really make sense. Not to mention users, their employees don't want to carry two phones. That could be super painful. And as you know, as much as everyone wants all their resources to be on the cloud, we know that that's not the reality. There are still on-prem resources that customers need access to. So we decided to build on top of Tunnel, which supports MDM devices, to now include support for unenrolled devices. So that's when Tunnel for MAM was born. So what is Tunnel for MAM? Tunnel for MAM extends the current Microsoft Tunnel VPN gateway to support devices that run on iOS and Android for unenrolled devices with Microsoft Intune. So what we're doing is we're enabling customers to use their personal devices to safely access on-prem resources. We've talked about what Tunnel is and the history behind it, but why should you use it? With the rise of remote work and the need for employees to stay connected even when they're not physically in the office, we see that Tunnel allows being able to provide their employees with access to corporate data on enrolled devices. With the increasing trends of employees bringing their own devices to work, it's crucial to have a secure solution in place to ensure that the confidentiality of sensitive and corporate data, as well as the personal data within the customer, are all being taken care of. So, again, why Tunnel? Let's ask yourself, do you want secure access to corporate data on unenrolled devices? Do you want convenient and seamless connection in on-prem apps and resources? And lastly, do you want to protect end user privacy? If your answer was yes to any of the three, then it feels like Tunnel for MAM is for you. Let's take a look at the benefits. Now we know the why, we know the history. Let's take a deeper dive in how we're able to enable employees to work from anywhere and everywhere. So some of the benefits of this include end users remain control of their personal devices. So you have one device for both work and personal use. No need to juggle both, or no need to wonder where the first one is. You just have one to take care of and one to do your work and personal business on. Next, there's no MDM device enrollment required, and company data remains protected. So we'll talk a little bit about that and how that works later on in the presentation. And lastly, we want to make sure that we're enabling, and Tunnel allows customers and companies to adopt a BYOD program. So what it means is bring your own devices, instead of having to purchase corporate-owned devices for their employees. As we dive in deeper to what do we offer, what type of support is given with Tunnel for MAM. So we're happy to say that going on with our March 1st release of the Intune SKU, we also released Tunnel for MAM on iOS and Android to the general public on March 1st. So what we have with some of those offers is we have Edge support, which we'll talk a little bit more about later down the line. We'll talk about line of business application support, which I'm going to dive into deeper about what that actually means. What do you need to do in order to make sure that your line of business apps have the capability and you're able to enable Tunnel for MAM? And then some of the other things we support is trusted root support, split tunneling, proxy support, and then also we're going to support modern authentication at the gateway level so that you're able to access those internet sites while using your corporate identity with Edge. And we'll talk a little bit more about what I mean by using your corporate identity with Edge and how that is different from using your personal one. But before we go into that, we have to dive into the differences between iOS and Android. So implementation-wise, these are pretty different. First, kind of starting off with Android, it's important to note that the Defender for Endpoint application actually provides the VPN in this scenario. The next one differences between Android is that we have a new feature called Auto Launch. So Auto Launch allows Tunnel to automatically connect once the application has been launched. And we'll go through later on down the slides how to configure this and how it works. So some cool stuff later down the line. Next thing I really think it's important to call out is the line of business app integration. So as we mentioned in the previous few slides, is we do support line of business apps, but there's an important caveat that those line of business apps need to both have the Intune MAM SDK for Android integrated, as well as the MSOL integration in the line of business apps in order for Tunnel functionality to work. On the iOS side, another key difference is the Tunnel for MAM iOS SDK, which is a new SDK that we are providing, is actually what provides the VPN on our iOS scenarios. So for line of business apps, not only do you have to integrate the Intune MAM SDK and the MSOL integration, but there's an additional SDK that needs to be integrated in order for Tunnel for MAM to work. And now going into some of the similarities. In regards to setup, there's two main things to call out here is you have to have an application configuration policy. You also have to have a app protection policy. And we'll go over how to set this up and put our admin hats on to walk through those things. Next two things to call out is the trusted root cert support. Both Android and iOS support trusted root cert. And lastly, Edge browser support. So we really want Edge to be the browser of choice here. And we've actually done some work on the back end with Edge to integrate these SDKs. So kind of diving a bit deeper into Edge, And some of the key highlights for Tunnel for MAM with Edge support is that we have a neat feature called Identity Switch. So what Identity Switch is when the VPN connects only when you're using a work or school account and disconnects when you're in a personal account or in private browsing. So we have a neat demo coming on later down the line, but just to call this out one more time is the identity switching. So if you're using a work or school account, Tunnel connects, but it disconnects when you're using a personal account or you're in private browser. The next thing is we have MAM application policies. You can send down MAM application policies to Edge for a Tunnel for MAM. And we also, like I said before, we've integrated the SDK with Edge. So Tunnel for MAM functionality is there. We've worked with them on the back end and we're able to get that going. And then lastly, you'll also need an application configuration policy for Edge. And we'll talk about why, because you need to enable the identity switching within the app configuration policy. That's just a quick highlight of what we offer, some of the differences and similarities, and then some key highlights on Edge. But I know what you guys are waiting for. How exactly do I configure Tunnel for MAM? So let's dive into that. Let's put our admin hats on and take a closer look. So we're going to go into the Intune console. And like I mentioned before, you need an application configuration profile for both iOS and Android. As we walk through the application configuration profile, I'm going to call out some key differences between iOS and Android. So just note for that. And then we can dive right in. So let's start off here for app configuration policy on our first page. We see here where we have the target applications that we want. So for public apps, we can put Edge, or our custom apps as our line of business apps. So one thing important to call out is that for Android, it's required, you have to have a Defender application configuration profile. And only Defender knows how to process the tunnel for Microsoft Tunnel settings in app configure. So with Android, you have to have a application configuration profile for Defender. And also be aware that managed apps does allow you to select multiple apps for different platforms. So it's really important to separate your application configuration profiles for Android versus your application configuration profile for iOS when it comes to Tunnel for MAM, just to make sure that your settings are aligned and it's a bit cleaner. And then one thing to note too is a race condition can exist if there's more than one application configuration policy for Defender, because they could have different tunnel sites and signs. So just be careful about that. One quick caveat. So let's say here, I've gone in, I've included my apps that I want to target Tunnel for. If I have an Android, then I make sure that I've also included Defender. And then for iOS, I've put in the applications that I want to target. So note that those are on two different app configuration policies, but we're going to dive in. Here, starting off first, this is the identity switching. So in the general configuration setting, what we do is this is how we provide the identity switch support on Android and on iOS. So it automatically connects when signing in with work accounts or with school accounts. So it's important to note that these settings, we have documented it, so you don't need to type every single word at a time. You can copy and paste, but it's important to note that no trailing spaces need to be included in this setting. So when you copy and paste it from our documentation, just note that make sure there's no trailing spaces. But I've added in my identity switching for both platforms. I moved on to here. So another thing to call out in our application configuration profile is that specifically on Android is we do support per app VPN on Android, but not on iOS, because the iOS SDK is the one that provides the VPN, and that needs to be integrated into every single line of business app. The SDK provides automatic per app VPN. So the SDK automatically starts the VPN on launch, and that's taken care of in the back end. So if you do select to create an application policy for your iOS environment or your iOS line of business apps, note that you will not see this setting. This will only for Android only. So next, I've gone in, I've added in my identity switching in my general configuration settings. I decided to use Microsoft VPN. I put in my site. I've gone down all the necessary requirements, and now I'm at trusted root header section. And I want to select the trusted root cert that I want to use with this environment. So one quick thing for background knowledge is that a lot of companies use their own on-prem certificate authority to protect their internal sites. Now, of course, this on-prem private CA, there's a corresponding public and trusted and intermediate keys, which are used to establish trust. They're not present on the device. With an unmanaged and unenrolled device, this can be a challenge. So this is something we had to overcome and we designed for. So this is new UX that has to do with the Microsoft Tunnel from AM. What we're allowing you to do is that you have to previously set up a trusted root cert profile, and that's also included in our documentation. You walk through setup, include your certificate within the setup process, and then once you created your trusted root certificate profile, you'll see it in this pane to the right. Then you can select the trusted root cert you want associated with this app configuration profile. So I've selected the trusted root certificate that I needed. I go through next. One thing I wanted to show is an example of what an experience looks like on Edge when a user on a device hits an internal site using Tunnel that doesn't have the corresponding trusted root cert for that site. They get this very scary connection warning message that the site can't be trusted, so you continue at your own peril. And basically what we did with the settings that I just talked about is we're addressing this so that users don't see this scary connection warning message and their sites are trusted. Going through next, we're going to take a deeper dive into the app configuration policy. So I mentioned before, both the app protection policy is needed for both iOS and Android, but we're going to take a deeper look at Android specifically because of the auto launch feature. And we have new UX that we're excited to show you guys. So going into the app protection policy, we see here in the data protection tab that there's a new UX that says start Microsoft Tunnel connection on app launch. So when Edge is launched, Edge sends an asynchronous VPN connection request to Defender, and then Defender notes to automatically turn on the VPN for the applications. So the request technically gets routed through company portal to the Defender app, but it's automatically triggered for end users launching Edge. Kind of going through a summary of what we spoke about before. So an app protection policy for Android, we see here the auto launch feature. It's important to note that the auto launch feature requires the MAM SDK integration. So Tunnel signals to Defender to connect to the VPN. That's one of the reasons, which we'll talk about later, that we have company portal as a needed application on the device, though it doesn't need to be signed in. And then when the app launches, Tunnel is established and any app on the device has access to the on-prem route available through Microsoft Tunnel Gateway. But it's important that in order to have auto launch feature, that you're required to have the MAM SDK. Next, we've integrated, as I mentioned before, with Edge for you already with the Tunnel Mini SDK. So Tunnel connects to Edge and Defender directly. And we've talked about identity switching. So a cool new feature that allows you Tunnel to connect when you're on your corp resources and Tunnel to disconnect when you're using your personal account or in a private browser. Next, we'll do a quick summary of iOS. So on iOS, you do need a one app protection policy is required. And note that the app auto launch is not a setting when it comes to your iOS configurations. That's only for Android. And we talked about those differences earlier. Also on app configuration policy, we don't have device-wide VPN, and the Tunnel connection is restricted to every targeted app. So now we've talked about the history behind Tunnel. We've talked about the history from Tunnel to Tunnel from AM. We've talked about how to configure it and walk through it with our admin hat on. Now it's time for a demo. So before we jump into the demo for Android, one quick pause is that we do have two required applications for Android. So first is company portal needs to be on the device, but it doesn't need to be signed in or enrolled. Again, this is for unenrolled devices, but company portal does need to be on the Android device, as well as Defender needs to be on the Android device as well. All right, let's walk through the scenario on Android. Tolu is a Contoso healthcare employee working at a big tech project with Derek for a high-profile client. Tolu runs to the grocery store, taking her away from her laptop. While away, she receives a Outlook notification that Derek needs her to review urgent documents. Derek, he's also working on this project with Tolu. He's wrapping up an important document for their client, but he needs Tolu to review it before he can send it out. A few things that you're going to see in this demo is Tolu accessing an internal document through email on an unenrolled device using Tunnel for MAM. Another thing you'll notice is that Tolu is unable to copy and paste from the internal web doc due to app protection policies. So let's hop into the demo. We see here that Tolu receives an email from Derek. She opens it up and she's directed into Edge. We see here that Tunnel automatically connected and she's able to click the downloaded file and review the necessary documents. We see she has a chance to review those documents. One thing that's important to note is that this document is stored on an internal web server and Tunnel is actually making the connection happen seamlessly. Because Tolu signed in with her corporate account, it's downloaded on the secure storage on Edge browser. But if she was on her personal account, she won't have been able to access that document. But because she's using Tunnel for MAM, she gets to connect seamlessly to Tunnel and being able to answer and review that document so she can properly send it back to Derek. Great. The document was reviewed and sent back to Derek. Now we see that Tolu's returned home. She picks up her personal iPad. She opens Edge and is prompted to sign in based on her browsing history. Tolu then checks something out for personal reasons, but because she's using Edge, it informs her that Tunnel is disconnected. This gives her the confidence that her privacy is protected and her data is not being sent through the company network. One thing you'll see here on iOS is that Edge automatically connects to Tunnel and automatically disconnects. So we're seeing the identity switching happening on Edge with iOS. Let's take a look at the demo. See here, she was previously doing work resources, and now we see that she switches from her work account to her personal account, and Tunnel is disconnected, giving her free range to do what she wishes on her personal account. So that's just a quick look at Tunnel on iOS and on Android. Thank you for your attention. Looking forward to answering your questions in the chat.